welcome back to another video, and in this video we are talking about permissions. Now on this channel we're talking about Kubernetes a lot. We talked about security best practices, we talked about authorization, we did a Twitter space as well with the nice folks from permit.io, and we're talking about a lot of these things. We're talking about like cost allocations and all these other things. So I try to introduce you to open source projects that you can contribute to, that make life easy and that are solving specific challenges and problems. So the problem space that I'm trying to focus on this video is authorization. You can check out the links in the description below. I've already done some amazing Twitter spaces. You can check the playlists and all these other things for some of the best practices. But the overall theme is that the problem statement is that building permissions can get complicated, right? And there are some amazing open source tools such as OPAL, which we'll be looking in this video, that can help you in doing that. So let's get started. So in this video, I'm going to give you an introduction to OPAL, and we're going to talk about real-time dynamic authorization. In addition to that, like first we're going to start with like what are the challenges it's trying to solve, right? What are the challenges that are being faced? I'll give you some examples. I'll reference some of the KubeCon talks as well, and how this entire thing came into picture. And we'll also talk a little bit more about the architecture. Obviously, in the end, a demo, like how you can use it. I'll point you to the resources, everything you need to get started, everything you need to get started with using it, get started with contributing to it, why would one want to use it, and in addition to that, we'll also see how it basically works. In addition to like open policy agent, you may have heard about that. So if you've not heard about that, so I'll cover that a little bit as well. And in the end, I'll share resources for you to get started with it. Cool. So introduction to OPAL. What is OPAL? OPAL is an open source project. It's an administration layer for open policy agent. If you don't know what open policy agent is, don't worry. I'll cover it in the next section about some of the challenges that projects are trying to solve. So basically, OPAL allows you to easily keep your authorization layer up to date. We already talked about authorization quite a lot on this channel. You can check out the DevOps Bootcamp playlist, and you can watch the videos about cloud native authorization, cloud native security, the 4 C's of cloud native, authorization best practices. All of these videos we have already covered. Cool. So it basically helps you in keeping up to date with your authorization layer for your application in real time. Okay, so basically you have your policies, and OPAL basically will detect the changes and it will push those changes live, and it's pretty seamless. Okay, but before moving forward, it may seem like, Kunal, that's fine, but we are not like understanding the prerequisites. Tell us what the challenges are, right? When you're talking about authorization, let's say, for example, what are the challenges and how OPAL is solving those? Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the challenges of building authorization. Okay, so when we talk about cloud native, we heard about like microservice based applications, and these can get pretty complicated if you have a lot of microservices. Okay, so what happens is, let's say you're managing permissions, you're building permissions, you're controlling your individual like microservice applications and all these other things. So when it comes to distributed applications and microservices, they may require like a lot of authorization points. Okay, and let's say every single microservice you have your authorization or whatever built in, and let's say now you want to make a change. So now that's going to get time consuming, it's going to get cumbersome. You want to refactor the entire code. If some code particular thing changes and you have to make a change in that authorization, you will do for every microservice, or what? How would that work out, right? So there are so many like best practices that people like to follow, and definitely the one that I just recommend is not one of it. So for example, instead of when we talk about authorization, so one of the best practices is you decouple your policy and code. So for example, you have your code that is for your authorization, right? The authorization layer has a separate code, and you have the code that is for your application. Okay, now you don't want to mix these things because of the same thing that I mentioned previously. So to avoid this particular thing, like not having it for every like microservice as such or whatever, you can create a separate microservice that will only handle, let's say, authorization. Okay, right? So you create one microservice that will handle the authorization, and it will be used by other services for their authorization needs. So something like this, you can see saying, hey, can I please view this record? So it's going to be like, okay, let me check, can Alice view this record? It's going to be like, okay, let me just evaluate the policy, right? And then retrieve additional attributes, and then this will give it like, okay, yeah, fine. So these other services are utilizing this authorization service. Okay, Open Policy Agent helps us in doing that. Okay, it is also the default policy engine for OPAL. OPA is the default policy engine for OPAL. Okay, so you can learn more about it when you go to the website of Open Policy Agent, but that's basically what it allows you to do. Okay, and when we talk about best practices, we also talk about like event-driven architectures, right? So as you can see one over here, why would we want to do event-driven, for example? Okay, so when we talk about why do we want to make this event-driven and why OPA is like having the shortcomings. So when we talk about modern applications, right? So you work with users, when you're working with permissions and applications, you work with roles assignments and things like that. Oftentimes you use third-party resources. So these things have one thing in common: they are being managed in real time. Okay, so every time there's an event that occurs that affects authorization, it needs to be pushed into the authorization layer ASAP so that it can be in sync with the application. Okay, or any other third-party application you're using, or any changes in policies that you're making or whatever. Okay, so for example, you want to make sure that the person can only access this page if they have a paid subscription. Okay, you have an application, you're like, okay, I want this person to access this particular page if they have paid for it. Okay, and let's say you are managing the payment status in like some other database that is like external, some bucket or object storage or whatever, some additional external page. Okay, so basically you would need, what would you need? You would need some authorization layer to be aware that, okay, Kunal is a user and Kunal has just paid for it. How would my authorization layer know Kunal has paid for it? Where is the data stored that says that, okay, Kunal paid for this service? In that storage. So your authorization layer should communicate with it somehow, right? Should communicate with it somehow and be up to date and things like that. Also, when you talk about if there's like a delay when it comes to the authorization, so there can be like some sort of consistency problems as well. It's like not updating, for example, right? You have one or more people who are requesting it, and then it's waiting for it to be updated, and then the person is just sitting not able to access even though they've paid for your service or things like that, right? Other than that, you have multiple microservices, so it would require like different sets of policies or subsets of policies and data and all these things. And just if you keep track of all the needs of all these things, it can be a little bit overwhelming if you don't work like in using an event-driven system. Okay, so these challenges that I just mentioned, like, okay, you have an external data, you have to maintain the like state, okay, like not the state, but like more like in the database, like, okay, has Kunal paid or not, or all these other things, and consistency, and managing too many. So this is like one of the problems that Open Policy Agent, it's one of the shortcomings. But in order to solve that, Netflix, for example, they have this great talk at KubeCon in 2017, how Netflix is solving authorization across their cloud. I'd recommend you to check it out. So they have their own internal thing that they're doing. Okay, it's not open sourced, but luckily it inspired OPAL. Now, when we talk about challenges, you can see that OPAL, so OPA and OPAL are like best friends. OPA will talk to OPAL, hey, are there any changes, right, to be made in the policy for my entire application stack or whatever? Open Policy Agent, OPAL will be like, yeah, I have this in the GitHub repository. There are some changes that have been made. Please apply these changes. And just be like, okay, I got you. All right. And the second thing that I was talking about, other thing was some external data source, right? So OPAL can basically help in tracking that as well, right? So you have any data source or whatever, like a database or some external service or what else, API, for example, right? So you can get the updates for that, and you can fetch it, and you can keep it up to date back into Open Policy Agent. Cool. So Kunal, these two things that you're saying, what is it actually doing? So it's basically making sure that Open Policy Agent, OPA, is always up to date with the latest policy information and the data also. Okay, So the data also, the paid customer thing that I mentioned, and the policy changes as well. Open policy agent will always be up to date in this. And that's the beauty of OPAL. That's what OPAL does. Simple, very, very nice. Okay, simple, nothing much, right? So very, very, straightforward stuff, and it's being used at a lot of places. You can check out this talk, by the way, and this is the GitHub repository. I'll show you later on. This is the architecture and things like that. A little bit of a demo and manuals and everything is mentioned over here, so you can check it out. By the way, do give them a follow on Twitter as well, and join the Slack community, and the GitHub is obviously available over here. By the way, all the links I will leave in the description below as well, so you can check it out. Cool. So you can give them a follow, and stay up to date about all these amazing things. And yeah, cool. All right. Yeah. What's next? How does it work? We'll be looking at the architecture, and let's see how that goes, and also a demo, obviously. Okay, so this is the architecture, and it's pretty straightforward. You have the OPAL client, right, and you have the OPAL server. Let's talk about the server first. So these are like the two main components when we talk about OPAL. So this is the client and this is server, and this is obviously over here we have OPA, which is the open policy agent. Do take in do remember the other previous example I showed you and sort of like try to relate it with it. But let's talk about the individual use cases. So as you can see, it's there's a GitHub repository that is working for it, which is a policy repository. So there's a Git repository where you put all your policies, the decoupling of the code that I was mentioning earlier, right? So this is the same thing. So if you take an example, where's the example? So for example, this repository. So this repository has an example repository. I will confirm this later on. So this is one of the example repository. Okay, over here, policy repository. Okay, which has all the policy information. Okay, so the server is basically responsible for two things. So it will track this repository, the policy repository, for any changes via webhook, right? And it will then push these changes to the OPAL client. So live update via WebSocket PubSub. Okay, it will live update it. Other than that, also the data sources. So all the data sources that you have over here, it's gonna fetch the data and all these other things. It will track all the relevant data sources for changes. Okay, has Kunal paid? Oh yeah, Kunal has paid. Okay, policy changed, right? Sound good? And then this will communicate with OPA. So what is this OPAL client, Kunal? So OPA, so basically in the two cases that I mentioned earlier for OPAL server, it will create this channel, okay, the PubSub channel that the OPAL client will use for particular topics it wants to track. And as soon as there will be a change, the OPAL server will notify all the clients that are subscribed to it. So you can have multiple clients, okay, for various topics as such, and every client will be like, okay, I want to subscribe to this particular policy change or whatever. Whenever it happens, let me know. Okay, it may not be like you want to get notified for everything, right? So you can pick clients can pick like the individual things. The client, let's talk a little bit more about that. So the client is something that will be deployed with OPA, open policy agent, and this will provide all the real-time updates, all the data chains and etc. from the server, the OPAL server, to open policy agent, right? So whenever there's like some policy changes in the repository, it will be pulled by the client from the server, as you can see over here, and then it will be giving it to open policy agent. It will be like, okay, now make the changes and the authorization updates or whatever. Okay, and when there's like any data sources, there's like a data upgrade or whatever that the OPAL client is registered to, the OPAL server will push an update to the client with that information on like, okay, cool, this is the data source that has been updated. OPAL server will tell, hey, OPAL client, the data source has been updated. Please pull the changes. OPAL client will be like, oh, thank you, I'll do that. And that's, the client will then reach like the latest sort of like whatever the latest data it has. So it will fetch that. Okay, cool. That's like sort of like the overview, and it's all working in real time. It's the real time thing. It's the crucial part. If there's one thing you can get from this video, it's like that the real time updates. That is the whole idea. Without that, it's just OPA. That's it. So the real time thing, it's That is the basically the main thing. Okay, that's the crucial part when we're dealing with authorization on the application level, right? So it's sort of like OPA on steroids. You're enhancing the authorization capability of Open Policy Agent. Again, as a reminder, how are you enhancing it? So you can update your policies in real time, and you can pull the relevant data from any source like databases, APIs, or other services, right? You can learn more about it on the GitHub architecture over here, architecture. So you can learn more about it. See, too much information is provided. Okay, so now let's look at a hands-on demo. So basically here we're going to use Docker Compose. So I'll show you how to run OPAL pretty simple, in a pretty simple way, and just with a few commands and just a few steps, you will be able to get it up and running, all the core features as well that you would be able to install. Like it will set up the server for you, the client for you, and Open Policy Agent as well. Cool. So OPAL server, OPAL client, and Open Policy Agent as well. So what do we do? How do we get started? So there's this file. So you can clone the repository, the OPAL repository. While you're at it, do give it a star, and that's it. Okay. So if you go into the Docker, in the Docker here, as you can see, in the Docker folder, there's a Docker Compose example folder. That is this file. Now, a few changes I'd like to make in this file. First of all, for some reason, the port 7000 was already occupied. So I changed the localhost port to 7070, right, for the OPAL client. No problem. And the second thing is, I'll tell you in detail later on as well. So, I mentioned previously that you put your policies in a code, right, in a repository, in a GitHub repository. So I just changed that repository to my own. So basically what I want you to do is, this particular repository in permit.io, there's OPAL example policy repo. So this has all the policies and everything for our example. Okay, which is what the Docker Compose example file uses. So you can just fork it, and that way you would now be able to make changes in this repository. Okay, if you want to learn more about Git and GitHub, I've done a video on that already. It has close to 1 million views now, so you can check that out on my channel as well. Okay, just in case you want to see it, it's very simple. Click on fork, Kunal, create fork, and then this URL that you get, the new URL, that you get, you just put it over here. That's it. Cool. Let's move forward. Okay, now I'm just going to run the command. Just going to say Docker Compose inside my Docker folder, the file path I'm giving. So this is inside Docker Compose example up. Very simple. Now this will do everything for us, right? That's why I recommend everyone to learn about Docker, and I've already done a video on this already. So even when you're contributing to open source projects and it can get really a little bit overwhelming to set up a new project, Docker makes it easy for us, right? So this is going to take some in a few minutes. All these things, images and everything will be downloaded, and would be having the server, OPAL server, the OPAL client, and the Open Policy Agent running as well. So while this is downloading, I'll just, since we have run this Docker Compose example file, I'll tell you a little bit more about what this file contains. So here you can see we have some services. So what do we have over here? So here it's running 3 containers. One is the broadcast, one is the OPAL server, and then there's the OPAL client as well. Over here you can see. Okay, broadcast, OPAL server, OPAL client. Okay, so later on we'll be learning more about in detail about how these things are happening in this video itself when we are working with the demo, but it's pretty straightforward. After this particular command has finished, you would have OPAL, and also Open Policy Agent would be running on your system, and you can access that. So you can access the client with 7070 port at localhost. This one server you can access at 7002, as you can see over here, and this one, the OPA, Open Policy Agent, that you can access at port 8181. Okay, cool. It's going to be running in server mode. So OPAL client, as we were talking about it, so it has its own APIs. So the port number is not really relevant. So Don't worry much about it. Okay, cool. Awesome. Almost done. And one more thing about the OPAL server, as I mentioned, it's on port 7002. So basically the OPAL client and like the CLI as well can connect to this port if you want to talk to OPAL server. I believe we have that up and running. So let me open up a new here, and what we're going to do is localhost 7070, that works. Just checking. 7002, that is fine. 8181, open policy agent is also running. Pretty cool. Just with one command we were able to set things up. Nice. All right, so now what we're going to do is that we know that open policy agent's REST API is at port 8181, right? So we can issue any request to it as we want. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to type this command over here, and there's the default policy here. As you can see, in this example repo, there we have a RBAC policy. Okay, and the data.json and everything that has all the information regarding Bob can access which location and all these other things. What role does Bob have and all these things. Okay, so the idea over here is that we have this Git repository for OPAL that we are going to work with. And as we have seen previously, that OPAL is going to fetch the data from this repository, and then it's going to push it to Open Policy Agent. So that's like the entire flow of what we're going to see in this demo. Okay, I made a clone of this, so no worries, same thing. Okay, so we have the OPAL example repository here. It has some data files. In the data.json, there's some data about the users and the role permissions and all these other things. Cool. So let's say we want to get this data via Open Policy Agent. Okay, so what you can do is I can just issue a get request. So you can do something like that, saying since it's running on port 8181, we just saw that you're getting the data of the users. So all these users, Alice, Bob, and Eve, would be presented to us in a JSON format. Pretty cool. Alice, Bob, and Eve. Very simple. Right? Cool. So now we can also issue an authorization query. So in Open Policy Agent, basically we can put in an authorization query with an input. So basically we have this command over here, and in the input it's going to ask us, whether the user, that is Bob, can read the finance resources whose ID is 123. Okay, so this is the ID of the resource, and basically it's saying that can Bob read it? Can Bob read it? So if I do it, it's saying true. Yes, Bob can read it. No problem. Right? So as you can see, Bob, employee, and billing. So if you talk about employee, they have finance, and the billing part, type finance, they have it. Like, yeah, folks who have type finance, they can definitely read it. Sorry, folks who have type billing, the role billing, can definitely read it. Okay, pretty cool, right? Now that's pretty in simple format. That's the demo, but let's try to make some changes to this. Okay, let me try to make some changes to this policy and see if it can be updated in real time. So we will be doing that using the OPAL client. Okay, so this is where this thing comes in. So this particular file you would not be able to edit if you were using the permit repository, but since you cloned it, so you own it, so like it's your, like you basically mean you are able to make changes to it. You have the account credentials or whatever, so you can edit this file now or as such. So what we're going to do is, as I already mentioned, I've put my own repository link over here. So let's update the data. Let's update the data via the OPAL server in itself. Okay, so as we can see over here that a user, here you can see that there's an RBAC policy over here as well, as you can see. So basically here you can see that the location is set to US. Okay, it's allowing permissions for location set to US. Okay, and one of the role has permission for the requested like action or the resource type, like we did in the previous example. So what we're going to do is we're going to make some changes to it. I'm going to install my OPAL client, pip install OPAL client. Okay, so now I'm going to publish the changes. What is this doing? So this basically is we're using the CLI to push an update to override the user location. Okay, event published successfully. So here what is happening is that we know that Bob's initial location is in the United States, right? And that is based on his IP address. And this is the exact reason why he can access the certain information when we run the command, right? So it was saying status as true. And when we change this data, so our policy also changes, and then that permission is removed, as we'll see in this demo, right? And now if I do the same query again, the same one we did for Bob previously, now it's not going to work. It's saying false. So what is happening over here when we publish the data via the CLI? So the OPAL data updates are built for like your own use cases. Okay, so you can specify a particular a specific topic. So in this particular example, you see that we specified the policy data, right, to target only specific OPAL clients. Okay, so via the server you're making these, directly with the server you're making the changes. Okay, and here basically we're required to do this because if every microservice you have has open policy agent as a sidecar on its own, then it makes sense to do that. And OPAL basically also specifies from where you are fetching this data. So in this example, you're saying that we're fetching this from api.country.is that anyone has access to. Okay, but if you want, you can have this to your own specific like private things as well. Okay, last but not least, we're also specifying to where like the destination in open policy agent, like the document, the data should be saved. So here we are saying that users Bob location. Okay, cool, amazing. So that was a little bit of a demo, and you can definitely learn more about in the obviously in the documentation. They have so many example repositories, and the docs are great as well, so you can check it out, the docs, how-tos and everything. So the same people that created OPAL also have this SaaS platform that allows you to completely implement permissions from scratch, and you don't have to build them yourself. I'll be definitely doing another video and demo on this later on. So we're talking about permissions, and this is full stack permission as a service, and definitely making life easier for developers. Policy as a low code, right? It's extremely easy for you to get started. They have a nice UI. You can see with so many languages are being supported. I'll be doing a demo on this and a hands-on tutorial as well on this. But I think that was about it. You can give OPAL a follow on a star on GitHub like I just did. You can check out their opal.ac. You can check out all the GitHub links, community, Slack, and Twitter, as I just mentioned. And it's open source, so if you want to contribute, go for it. You have any questions, there's a Slack channel, you can ask it over there. And yeah, you can take a screenshot of this and share what you learned. Great opportunity for you to write a blog on this as well. By the way, we have the Hashnote challenges going on. So Hashnote. So we have a blogging challenge going on. So you can write anything and we will send you some swag. And every month there's a grand prize winner. So you can write about open source tools. You can write about OPAL, for example. And this month's grand prize is 10,000 rupees, little above $100. So, and we have given away like Macs as well, and Logitech MX Master, nice mouses. So you can join the community, you can take part. You have to write a blog on anything you want, and we'll be giving away weekly winners for swag and a grand prize winner. So all you have to do is just take part and share your blogs, and that's it. Anything, non-code blogs, code blogs. We just want to promote learning in public. Basically, that's what it's all about. All the information can be found over here, so make sure you check it out. And that's basically about it. Thanks a lot for sharing. Do let me know what you think in the comments below, and on Twitter you can tag me. You can tag OPAL and Permit.io, and share your blogs. And looking forward to giving you some swag. And check out Cube World. Check out all the links in the description below. And I'll see you in the next one. Have a great day.